Alright, so welcome back to the epilogue postscript final video on the Datsun Z car I've been working on. And there's really not a lot to show you because I didn't film a lot this last month. But there's a lot to tell you about. And this little Z car really gave me a run for my money as far as the aggravation level goes, because all kinds of small little things kept breaking and kept popping up. My first 4 test drives around town resulted in me breaking down for a variety of reasons. The first one was the fuel pump. I chewed up the brand new fuel pump by not attaching a fuel filter in front of it between the tank and the pump, which they recommended. I cleaned out the fuel tank and thought that was good enough, and apparently there's still some grime in the tank because the fuel pump gave out. And what that means is it quit putting enough pressure in the system to run. It just wouldn't run. I barely made it halfway across town. So I tracked that down, figured out that the fuel pump was bad, ordered another one, put that on with a fuel filter, ran great. The next time we went around town, the fuel pressure was up and down. So I started testing items and determined that my pressure regulator wasn't working quite right. I had a leak on the cold start valve, the throttle position sensor, and the air meter were both not putting out the right numbers. And so I tore them apart, and all the contacts were corroded. So I cleaned up the contacts, put everything back together, and it worked great. So the next time I drove it around town, I broke down and I had to push the car down the boulevard to get it out of a major intersection, and it took me a while to figure out that the bullet connectors coming off of the water temperature sensor, which feeds information to the computer, were corroded. I'd cleaned them up once, but apparently not good enough. So I cleaned up the bullet connectors, put them back together, runs fine again. So the last problem I'm having now is that I'm catching some grinding when I shift. Clutch all the way in, I'm catching some teeth. Usually that could mean the synchros are worn, but it's on every gear, including reverse. I don't believe reverse has a synchro. So what that means is if it's in every gear, that means that the input shaft is turning a little bit when it shouldn't be. You put the clutch in, it should stop. So what potentially is happening is that there is some grit or some corrosion on the input shaft, which is keeping the clutch plate from moving away from the engine enough. It's just barely touching, so it's getting some. So that's what I'm dealing with now. I'm contemplating pulling the engine and looking at it further. I put in a little bit of Synchro Doctor. You know, it's a thicker gear lube basically, and it helped about 50% of the grinding. You can also rev match. If you just rev match the engine, there's no grinding. What that does is it speeds the engine up to the same speed as whatever gear you're trying to get into. Anyway, all that being said, the car is done, and I'm a little embarrassed that this wasn't a proper rebuild like I normally like to do. This was supposed to be just a assembly to get the parts together so that I don't lose them all. I had moved the car around this garage and the back shop 2 or 3 times over the last few years, and every time I moved it around, boxes were ending up in different spots, and I was starting to forget what went where. So it was supposed to be just an assembly, and then down the road we were going to restore it. Well, it kind of snowballed into doing a lot of work on it to make it a really nice driver. Didn't do the paint, we didn't do weather stripping, I didn't do anything on the suspension, but we did a bunch of other stuff to make it a actually pretty decent driver. So because it wasn't a proper rebuild, I didn't really film everything in depth like I like to do. So what we are working on now is the second install of a carpet kit in this car. Months ago, with the idea that I've already explained that this was supposed to just be an assembly and a very minor rebuild just to get the car back together and running because I was beginning to lose parts. So months ago I ordered a carpet kit for the earlier 70s 240Z. I like the style, I like the look better. Carpet on the floors and that vinyl on the sides. I thought it looked cooler and it was a little cheaper, so I was going to go that route. Bought the kit, installed it, looked nice. However, over the last few months of rebuilding the car, it's kind of snowballed into more of a traditional rebuild. Not doing the paint, not doing the dash, not doing some of the suspension parts, but overall it's becoming pretty nice. And also it's pretty original. I've ordered NOS factory hoses and clamps, various engine parts to keep it completely original stock. And so as the car was being finished last week, I decided that the carpet kit looked out of place. It looked like a 240 carpet kit in a 280Z, which was all original. So I went ahead and bought a 280Z carpet kit, and that's what we're installing now. Now the 280Z has carpet from door to door everywhere, which means you have to fit it and you have to cut holes, and it's much more of a bummer to put in, but it's factory stock for this year, so that's what we're doing. Anyway, that's what we're working on right now. Well, it's kind of hard to drive a manual transmission holding the camera, but we'll give it a shot here. Car runs great, zips around town now that I've figured out a few of the peccadillos that were causing me trouble. Fun little car to drive, I'm kind of enjoying it. Little two-seater sports car, very zippy. One of the last things I have to deal with is the gas tank still has some crud in it. So the filter between the tank and the pump fills up about every 3 weeks or so. You can tell that the fuel pump starts to make some noise. It's time to change the filter when that happens. I'm hoping that it cures itself and enough of the junk gets cleared out over time, but worst case scenarios, I'll have to pull the tank and steam clean it or something. We're back to working on this one. We've got the engine and the drivetrain all installed. We fired up the motor, everything works, and nothing major to repair or to fine tune. So now I can start putting the body work around the motor. I can put the fenders back on, the front grille and all that. I wanted to wait until the motor was in and running before I did that because it's easier to get to. Motor's in, running gear, brakes are done. All the lines, the fuel lines, the brake lines, the battery cables all strung to the back. So everything's done. All we have left to do is paint on the outside, body work and paint. So that's what we're working on. This will be painted and on the road by middle of summer. Sans interior. The interior will probably wait until wintertime, later this year. All right, we're installing the mini headers today. Had to do a little bit of custom work to the bolts because the bolt heads are big enough to where they're contacting the tubes. So you just take a grinding wheel and get rid of some of the edges and they eventually fit. We also came up with some S10 spark plugs, which are about a 1/4 inch shorter than regular spark plugs, so that they fit a little bit better behind here. And also we're going to use a older style screw-on type of a spark plug wire, which will be exposed, so we wanted to keep them away from the headers. We are neck deep in assembling the motor and the rest of the suspension, and eventually we'll get back to doing body work and paint. Yeah, this is square. This is exactly square. Okay. All right, we are installing fuel lines here tonight. And I bought some straight stock 3/8 fuel line, and I'm bending it to run the curve of this frame rail. The reason I'm creating new fuel line is the ones I took out of the car when we disassembled it were all rubber from the fuel tank all the way to the front, just a long piece of rubber, which I'm not a fan of. You shouldn't do that because you'll spring a leak at some point. You don't want that. So we're doing metal fuel lines. That's what we're working on right now. I'm just bending them to follow the contours of this frame. All right, we're gonna bring the fuel line out the frame here and make a little curve here, and then we'll attach a little piece of rubber between these two. I don't know how far to come out here yet because I'm not sure where the body, the radiator, the skirt, all that hangs down here, if it'll interfere or not yet. So we'll have to figure that out next. Here are the spark plug wires that we're working on. I decided to go with something that looked older and kind of more antique than just regular black spark plug wires you would buy. These are the old cloth covered wires that have a laminate on top of them to keep them clean. And we're using the Roha type of a nut retainer instead of the boot, just for looks. We're going to have the sides of this hood removed so you can see the engine when you're driving, and I thought this would look a little bit better than standard. Right now I'm just building out the kit. What you do is you cut your spark plug wires to length and then put on the attachments on each end. So what you're doing for one end is attaching a boot for the distributor, the other end we're attaching the old-fashioned nut, brass nut. They require different length copper to be exposed. They sell different style clips depending on what distributor cap you have. I have the HEI, the high efficiency. So this is the proper cap for that. Go ahead. Again.
Choked out.
Try it again. Well, part of the thing is when we assemble the motor, there's grease everywhere. Oil down all the cylinders had oil in them. All right, so we're working on the front fenders right now. Before I put them on the car, I want to try to finish all the welding, all the major repairs before we get to the fine tuning for the body work and for the body filler. You can see I made a scribe here. I made a pattern
that fits the front of this fender, which is the best fender. This one's pretty good as far as the overall shape. It's got quite a bit of damage that I'm gonna have to use some filler on. But as far as the shape, it's not too bad. So that's what I'm going for. So when I come to this other fender, which is in much worse condition, I flip the pattern over, and you can see that it's not even close. It's not even close to being right. So what has to happen is this area right here is way too far out. The overall shape should go in and then out. This all has to be moved in probably an inch or more, right where this line is. This line has to be hammered in or shaped in. And then I've got to create this shape perfectly round, and then I got to patch this in. So I have my work cut out for me. Ultimately, this will all be covered with filler, most likely fiberglass, and then a little bit of Bondo or something, because I don't have the skills to make it perfect out of just metal. I don't have that much experience. I can rough it in pretty good. Anyway, that's what I'm working on this week. All right, we found another fender here on the eBay, a couple $100. Went ahead and ordered it. The guy's just going to cut off the front half of this fender and send it to me. And we're going to use this as a patch instead of trying to manually repair that driver's side fender. Be a little bit easier. All right, so I found a source for that front fender on eBay, coming from Iron Trap Garage, another YouTube channel. He's going to cut off a section of the front fender for me and ship it out. So in the meantime, I'm going to switch my attention to this rear fender. It's a little wonky back here. I'm trying to get the seam between the fender and the body to be fairly even. And then I got to do a couple of weld spots here. I got a couple of brake cracks in the fender. So I'm getting it lined up. I use a jack to get it lined up. We're going to cut a couple of relief cuts in there to relieve some tension, and then we're going to start doing some welding on this. That'll take us a few days. Alright, so there's your update. The next video, which I have no idea when it'll come along, you'll see this sucker driving down the street. Been a long journey, but looking forward to actually driving the sucker around town. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys later.